Hello students, I am Dr. Madhavi Kevle, MBBS MD Anatomy, presenting the first part of the lecture on larynx. So at the end of this lecture, you should be able to enumerate the intrinsic muscles of larynx and also the cartilages of larynx. You should be able to write a short note on cricoid muscle. You should be able to give the origin, insertion, nerve supply and actions of only two important muscles, that is the cricothyroid and posterior cricoarytenoid muscles. So let's begin. If you see the surface anatomy of larynx, here in this picture you can see the in both the images. On the left side it is the lateral aspect of the neck, and on the right side you can see the anterior aspect of the neck. So the white colored structure, which is marked number 1 here in this picture, is called the hyoid bone, that is the surface marking of the hyoid bone. And to orient yourself, see this 6 numbered red colored strap, this is the sternocleidomastoid muscle. The number 2 white colored bone here is the clavicle, which we are already familiar with, and number 5 here is the sternum. So now here the blue outline that you see in this lateral and anterior view, both, this one is nothing but our larynx. So let's get started with learning of the larynx. What is the larynx? Larynx is also called as the voice box, and it is the upper expanded part of the lower respiratory tract. Now respiratory tract has got two parts, upper and lower. Now this upper expanded part of the lower respiratory tract is exactly the space that communicates above with the laryngopharynx and below with the trachea. We should keep in mind that the larynx is a mobile structure and it moves with deglutition. Now what is deglutition, students? Deglutition means swallowing. The act of swallowing is called deglutition. Now what are the functions of larynx? The functions of larynx, the most important function is the protection of the lower respiratory tract from it protects the lower respiratory tract from, so nothing should enter it. No foreign body or uh, even food is foreign body in the respiratory tract. So no foreign body should enter the lower respiratory tract except for air. Nothing else should enter. Now, second function we can see is phonation. Now, phonation is such a function which has been evolved over ages in humans, interspecies evolution. The next function is respiration and deglutition. So, deglutition, as I have already mentioned, it means swallowing. Now, what is the location of the larynx? The larynx is located in the anterior midline of the upper part of the neck, and it lies in front of the laryngopharynx. And what exactly is the level according to the cervical vertebrae, students? It lies in front of third, fourth, fifth and sixth cervical vertebrae. And this larynx, it extends from the root of the tongue to the trachea. Now the sizes, it is very important to know the sizes of larynx, which are different in males, females and in children. The most important, you should know that the length of larynx in males is 44 millimeter and the length of larynx in females is 36 millimeters in adults. And this is important to know the internal diameter. Up to the age of 3 years in children, the internal diameter of larynx is only 3 millimeter, and in adults it is 12 millimeter. So moving ahead. Now, what is the skeletal framework of larynx? How is this larynx actually composed of? What is this larynx actually composed of? So basically the skeletal framework of larynx is made of cartilages which are joined together by certain ligaments, which we will see there are two types of ligaments, extrinsic and intrinsic, and certain muscles, also extrinsic and intrinsic type of muscles, are attached to these cartilages. Now all together the cartilages, they will form the rigid framework, and ligaments and muscles also will help in the formation of the skeleton, and all of these are covered by on the inside by the mucous membrane. Now this mucous membrane, students, it is continuous above with the laryngopharynx, and below it is continuous with the trachea. So now in this picture you can see the anterior view of larynx. Let's just have some idea. In the midline from above downwards you see some structures. Let me explain you. The first you see is epiglottis. It is a type of cartilage of the larynx. Next you see in the midline is this one is the hyoid bone, which is slightly creamish in color. From the hyoid bone extending up to this shield like structure, this shield like structure is nothing but the thyroid cartilage. Up to the thyroid cartilage from the hyoid bone, what you see here, this green structure, is thyrohyoid membrane. Between this shield like structure and a ring like structure below that, there is again a green uh, structure, which is cricohyoid membrane. Now, and below the this structure, this one is the cricoid cartilage. Here if you can see the arch of cricoid cartilage just below the thyroid cartilage. Let's get familiar with the rest of the things. Now, what are the cartilages of larynx? So there are two types of cartilages. Some are paired cartilages and some are unpaired cartilages. There are about 9 cartilages. Now the paired cartilages are arytenoid, corniculate and cuneiform. Corniculate and cuneiform are very small paired cartilages. Most important for us among the paired cartilages is arytenoid cartilage. Now unpaired cartilages are thyroid, cricoid, epiglottis, cuneiform. So among all the cartilages of the larynx, the most important ones that you must know at the level of MBBS are thyroid, cricoid and arytenoid cartilages. So the cartilages of larynx, the main cartilages, as I have already mentioned, are cricoid, thyroid and two arytenoid cartilages. Now all the three of them, thyroid, cricoid and most of the part of arytenoid cartilage, it is consisting of hyaline type of cartilage. Yes, please revise your general anatomy here. So thyroid, cricoid and arytenoid are hyaline type of cartilages, and corniculate, cuneiform and epiglottic cartilages are elastic fibrocartilage. They are elastic type of cartilage, and among all these cartilages, the thyroid, cricoid and most of the part of arytenoid cartilage, they will undergo calcification in increasing age. Now, the most important for us to know is the structure of thyroid cartilage. So, what is this thyroid cartilage? It is basically made of two laminae. Laminae means thin, square, leaf-like structures, which are called laminae, which are two right and left. So, they are roughly quadrilateral, and these laminae, they meet in front at an angle called the thyroid angle. Now this thyroid angle, it forms the prominence of the larynx, and this angle will be acute in males and obtuse in females. Means it is 90 degrees in males and 120 degrees in females. In males we see this laryngeal prominence more prominent, so it is called the Adam's apple. On the surface of the neck in front we see this Adam's apple, which is not present in the females, it's only in the males. Now where the upper part of this laminae, the anterior borders of this laminae, they are separated by the notch that they don't meet each other, and the posterior margin of these laminae is prolonged. When it prolongs upwards, it forms a projection called the superior cornu. Cornu means horn. And when it projects downwards, it forms a smaller projection called the inferior cornu. So superior and inferior cornu and notch, these are the parts of the thyroid cartilage. Okay, so the inferior cornu, it will articulate with the corresponding cricoid cartilage. Now here in this picture you can see the thyroid cartilage from the lateral view and anterolateral view. So the upwards pointing structure is the superior cornu and downwards pointing structure is the inferior cornu. In between, what you see is the laminae, and on the sides of each laminae there is an oblique line, which is very important for us because it gives attachment to certain structures. So now let's see the ligaments of thyroid cartilage. As we have already seen, the laryngeal cartilages, they are attached with some ligaments, and also some muscles are taking attachment over it. So let's see it individually, starting with the thyroid cartilage. So as I have already mentioned, and I'm again pointing in this slide, that the laryngeal prominence, which is formed by the thyroid angle, in males, we can see it in the front of the neck, which is called as the Adam's apple. Now, if we see in this picture, we see the posterior surface of the thyroid, and in the posterior surface of thyroid, in the midline, you can see that it is giving attachment to three ligaments. Starting from above downwards, there is thyroepiglottic ligament, vestibular ligament, and a pair of vocal ligaments. So vestibular and vocal are two in number, but thyroepiglottic ligament, which is present in the midline, it is only one. So what are the muscles that are attached to the thyroid cartilage? They are important muscles: palatopharyngeus, salpingopharyngeus, and stylopharyngeus. You have already heard these muscles when you have studied the pharynx lecture. So now you know that they are taking the attachment, actually it's an insertion on the posterior border of the lamina of each lamina of the thyroid cartilage. Now the outer surface, as we have already seen, the outer surface of each lamina, it presents with an oblique line, and this oblique line again gives attachment to some important muscles. These are the thyrohyoid, sternothyroid, and inferior constrictor, which is also called as the thyropharyngeus muscle. So let's repeat again. The posterior border of each lamina, it provides attachment to three muscles, namely palatopharyngeus, salpingopharyngeus, and stylopharyngeus. And the oblique line provides attachment to thyrohyoid, sternothyroid, and thyropharyngeus part of the inferior constrictor muscle. Now the next important cartilage that we must study is the cricoid cartilage, and this cricoid cartilage is a signet shaped cartilage, means ring shaped cartilage. It has got a lamina, which is the flat leaf-like structure, and an arch. So it has two structures, lamina and arch, and also it has got facet for articulation with other two cartilages, which are arytenoid and the thyroid cartilage. So as I have already mentioned, cricoid cartilage is a ring shaped structure, and it is situated at the level of C6 vertebra. So this point is very important, that the cricoid cartilage is situated at the level of C6 vertebra. It can come as an MCQ, students. So another MCQ point related to cricoid cartilage is that this cricoid cartilage is also called as the foundation stone of larynx. It is also called as the foundation stone of the larynx, and since it is a ring shaped, completely closed ring shaped structure, it you can imagine that it will encircle the lumen of this larynx, and all these cartilages, they are forming rigid framework, means that when the person will be doing the respiratory movements, that time the larynx will stop, will be prevented from getting collapsed, and the airway will stay patent. So again repeating, cricoid cartilage is the foundation stone of the larynx. Now going ahead, let's see what is the next one. It is the epiglottis. Now epiglottis is rudimentary in human beings, but in animals like cows, epiglottis is very useful. It is a leaf-like structure, and it extends up behind the hyoid bone, and it reaches till the base of the tongue. So the epiglottis, it also is connected to the thyroid cartilage with the help of thyroepiglottic ligament. Now coming to the next one, it is the arytenoid cartilage. They are paired, two of them, and they have got an apex, a base, and three surfaces, namely posterior, anterolateral, and medial surface, and two processes, which are muscular and vocal process. Now these you should know, just that there are two small cartilages. One is called corniculate cartilage, and one is called cuneiform cartilage. Corniculate cartilage are small conical nodules, and cuneiform is a rod shaped. Now let's see the joints of the larynx. Now there are three joints of the larynx, namely cricothyroid, cricoarytenoid, and arytenocorniculate joint. Let's see them one after the other. So the cricothyroid joint, it is a plain synovial joint. Please revise your general anatomy here. It is a plain synovial joint, and it is present between the inferior cornu of thyroid cartilage and the cricoid cartilage, and only two types of movements are permitted at this joint, that are the rotatory and the gliding movement. Also, this joint is very important because the recurrent laryngeal nerve, it enters the larynx very close to this cricothyroid joint. Now next one is the cricoarytenoid joint. Just like cricothyroid joint, it is also a plain synovial joint between arytenoid and the lamina of cricoid cartilage. It also provides two movements. It permits two movements, that is a rotatory movement and the gliding movement. The last one joint is the arytenocorniculate joint, which is not so important functionally. Now the ligaments and the membranes of the larynx. There are extrinsic and intrinsic membranes and ligaments of the larynx. So the most important for us are the thyrohyoid, cricothyroid, quadrangular, and cricovocal membranes. So most significant fibrous membranes and ligaments of the larynx are thyrohyoid, cricothyroid, quadrangular, and cricovocal membranes. Now let's see some extrinsic ligaments. So what do you mean by extrinsic ligaments? These are present, these are the membranes and the ligaments which are present on the outside of the inner tube of the larynx. So they are present outside the laryngeal cavity. So the most important for us are the thyrohyoid membrane, and this membrane is present between the from the upper border of the thyroid cartilage up to the lower border of the hyoid bone. Now this is pierced on either side by internal laryngeal nerve and superior laryngeal vessels. So here in this picture you can see these two dots in this green structure. This one is the thyrohyoid membrane, which is pierced by internal laryngeal. Now the next one, only you should know at least the names of them. So by the names you can easily guess they are present between which structure. So cricotracheal ligament, it will be present between cricoid cartilage and the first tracheal ring. Thyroepiglottic ligament, it will be present between the epiglottis and the thyroid angle. Hyoepiglottic ligament, it will be present between hyoid bone and the epiglottis. And cricothyroid ligament, it will be present between the cricoid cartilage and the thyroid cartilage. Now coming up to the intrinsic ligaments. So the intrinsic ligaments, these are the ones that are forming the inner tube of the laryngeal cavity. So they are present just outside the laryngeal cavity, just outside the mucous lining. Now already we have seen that the mucous lining which is present inside the laryngeal cavity, it is continuous above with the laryngopharynx and below with the trachea. So this these intrinsic ligaments, they are quadrate or quadrangular membrane and cricovocal membrane. So it is the above there is a structure called sinus of larynx. Need not go into very much details of this at the MBBS level, but above, the part above the sinus of larynx is called the quadrangular membrane, and the part below this sinus is called the cricovocal membrane. And you should know about the vocal ligament, which is made of yellow elastic tissue. And also you should know just the theory that quadrangular membrane, it thickens below to form the vestibular ligament. So in this picture you can see the ligaments, the big one just below the epiglottis, this one is the quadrangular membrane, and it forms a thickening called as the vestibular ligament, which is present between the arytenoid cartilage here and the thyroid thyroid cartilage here, and just below the arytenoid cartilage and above the cricoid cartilage you can see the cricothyroid membrane. Now coming to the next slide, which is the extrinsic muscles of the larynx. So the extrinsic muscles of the larynx, you've already studied them when you have studied the pharynx. So these are the palatopharyngeus, salpingopharyngeus, stylopharyngeus, and thyrohyoid and sternothyroid muscles. Now what is the importance and the function of these extrinsic muscles? You should know this, that all these muscles, they will elevate the larynx, except sternothyroid, which depresses the larynx. So palatopharyngeus, salpingopharyngeus, stylopharyngeus and thyrohyoid, what do? All of them elevate the larynx, and sternothyroid, it will depress. Now as I have already mentioned that the longitudinal muscles of the pharynx are also extrinsic muscles of the larynx. So just go through the nerve supply, origin and insertion. When you study the pharynx, it can be utilized here also. So just explaining in brief that the stylopharyngeus is supplied by glossopharyngeal nerve, which is the ninth nerve, and the palatopharyngeus and salpingopharyngeus is supplied by the 11th cranial nerve. So from the previous slide that we have seen, we know that extrinsic muscles, two of the extrinsic muscles of the larynx are sternothyroid and thyrohyoid. These extrinsic muscles are also infrahyoid muscles of the neck, which is also called as the strap muscles. Infrahyoid muscles means the muscles which are present below the hyoid bone. So two of them are also extrinsic muscles of the larynx, which is sternothyroid and this one thyrohyoid. Here you can see this muscle, this long muscle which is going from the manubrium sterni up to the hyoid bone. This one is the sternothyroid muscle, and it is very ribbon like, that's why it is called as a strap muscle. And here this upper part of the this muscle, which is, you see this blue structure behind, this blue structure is nothing but our thyroid cartilage, and this cream colored pinkish cream structure is our hyoid bone. So this muscle between, extending between the thyroid cartilage and the hyoid bone is thyrohyoid muscle. Now, what are the intrinsic muscles of the larynx? Now, these muscles, intrinsic muscles, are very important because they are responsible for the movement of the vocal cords, which will generate the voice, and that's why the larynx is called, also called as the voice box. And also they help in closing and opening of the laryngeal inlet. Why is it so important? Because the primary function of larynx is protection of the underlying lower respiratory tract. So in order to prevent foreign body entering the lower respiratory tract, the laryngeal inlet should be opened and closed, and this depends on the intrinsic muscles. Now let's see one after the other. In this lateral view of the intrinsic muscles, in the lateral view of the larynx, you can see the intrinsic muscles. So here there is the thyroarytenoid muscle, lateral cricoarytenoid muscle, thyroepiglotticus muscle, and ariepiglotticus muscle. So now, according to the name, you can already guess these muscles are present between which cartilage and which cartilage. So now let's see some important points regarding the intrinsic muscles. So as we have seen, the main functions of intrinsic muscles of the larynx is opening and closing of laryngeal inlet, and abduction and adduction of vocal cords, and to increase and decrease the tension of the vocal cords. In all these are necessary for generation of voice, which is called as phonation. Phonation we will study in the next part of the larynx lecture, but here we should study which muscle is responsible for which function. So there are three muscles which are responsible for opening and closing of laryngeal inlet, which are oblique arytenoids, ariepiglotticus, and thyroepiglotticus. Out of these three, only thyroepiglotticus is responsible for opening of the laryngeal inlet. Now, which muscles are responsible for abduction of vocal cords? Only one muscle, posterior cricoarytenoid muscle. This is important to know that it abducts the vocal cord. Other two muscles, that is namely lateral cricoarytenoid muscle and transverse arytenoid muscle, both are adductors of the vocal cord. Now, which muscles will increase and decrease the tension of the vocal cords? So cricothyroid and vocalis muscle, these two muscles, they will tense the vocal cords, and there is only one muscle, that is the thyroarytenoid, which relaxes the vocal cord. Students, intrinsic muscles of larynx is a very important topic. There are as such many names of many muscles, but you should know this from the MCQ point of view. Now, as I have already mentioned in the specific learning objectives of the larynx first part of this larynx lecture, that we should know the origin and insertion of cricothyroid muscle. Now, cricothyroid muscle is a triangular muscle, and it originates from the arch of cricoid cartilage, and it is inserted into the thyroid cartilage, namely the inferior cornu of the thyroid cartilage and the lower border of the lamina of the thyroid cartilage. Now, some important points about cricothyroid. Here, this cricothyroid muscle, you can see this this is responsible for the maintenance of tone and pitch of the voice, and so the sound production depends on the movements of the vocal cord. That's why when this muscle moves, vocal cords will be tensed. So this muscle is rightly called as the tuning fork of the larynx. Cricothyroid is also called as the tuning fork of the larynx. Now this cricothyroid, it is supplied by external laryngeal nerve, and if there is paralysis of external laryngeal nerve or any damage to external laryngeal nerve, then the voice quality can be changed. So this is very important muscle. It is also called as the tuning fork of larynx. Next muscle that we should know is the vocalis muscle, which is important for the modulation of voice, and it is supplied by the recurrent laryngeal nerve. So this vocalis muscle, it is supplied by the recurrent laryngeal nerve. So here it is in between, from uh, between the thyroid cartilage. Here this is the thyroid cartilage, and here this one is the arytenoid cartilage, and this brown structure, strap like midline structure, horizontally present, this is the vocalis muscle. The posterior cricoarytenoid muscle, this is an important muscle. You should know the origin and insertion of this muscle. So it originates from the posterior surface of cricoid lamina and inserts into the arytenoid cartilage, and again it is supplied by recurrent laryngeal nerve. And what is the function? It abducts the vocal cords. Now this is a very important muscle, rightly called as the safety muscle of larynx, because when the vocal cords will be abducted, that time the larynx will be, the cavity will be diamond shaped, and then only the air can pass through it. So if there is a paralysis of this muscle due to damage to the nerve supplying it, which is the nerve that supplies it, so when the nerve will be damaged, that time the abduction of vocal cords will be limited. It will depend on it is unilateral or bilateral damage. So rightly this muscle is called the posterior safety muscle of the larynx, because if the air inlet is collapsed, the person will die due to lack of air. So no air will pass to the lower respiratory tract. Let's summarize the muscles. So the transverse arytenoid muscle is the only muscle which is unpaired among all the intrinsic muscles. Tuning fork of larynx is the name given to the cricothyroid muscle. The vocalis muscle is the modulator of the voice, and the safety muscle of larynx is posterior cricoarytenoid muscle. And now all the intrinsic muscles are supplied by recurrent laryngeal nerve except the cricothyroid. So if the recurrent laryngeal nerve is damaged, all the intrinsic muscles except cricothyroid will be affected. Cricothyroid is supplied by the external laryngeal nerve. Now, all these are actually the branches coming from the vagus nerve. So, this is all for today, and I hope you like the lecture and go through it again and again. Uh, this lecture is the foundation stone of the next lecture and understanding the concepts of phonation. Thank you very much.